Welcome to Containerized Conversations. I'm your co-host, Josh Warhurst,
And I'm Jesse Caffarelli.
and today we're going to talk about some books.
Yeah. And I think we're going to actually talk about the one book. If you're
Viva.
going to read a book, you need to read it. And it is
Yeah.
The Phoenix Project.
The Phoenix Project.
And look at that.
I got
So
it. I
Josh,
got it with me.
I read it years ago. This is like kind of fresh in your mind. What are your thoughts
Freshish.
on The Phoenix Project?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting novel. If you haven't read it, it's by Gene Kim, Kevin Bear, and George Spafford. It's a novel about DevOps, which is kind of a unique concept in my mind. There's a lot of books that are like, here's how to implement DevOps to your company, or
Yeah.
here's how to be an embedded developer, here's how to be a senior developer, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of good books that are sort of how to do something well,
Yeah.
but they're very textbooky.
Yeah.
And the Phoenix Project is actually a companion to another book that the same authors made, which was like the DevOps Handbook.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Phoenix Project is their novelization of that book. And I think
Yeah.
it's actually very successful because of the novelization element. I think
Yeah.
people can get something out of it because it's just a fun read,
Yeah.
but it's also like, oh, these are the people that are at my company. I've seen them firsthand. I was reading lines from this book and I said, oh my
Yeah.
God, this is my company. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that's the experience that a lot of people have reading that book.
Yeah, I mean it's more of just a dramatic telling of a startup trying to implement DevOps. That's what makes it amazing. And fun fact, Gene Kim never worked at a DevOps company. He was non-technical. He is a fictional storyteller. And he nailed those characters, like you said.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. They're all fictitious
Yeah,
characters, but some of them are based on real people,
they
right?
are. They are.
One of the characters that this is in the afterwards, but is that's based on a real person is the character of Brent.
For the audience members who haven't read this book, from this point on there will be spoilers. Now, it
True.
won't, even if we spoil it, this book will still be amazing. But if you don't want it ruined for you, let's pause the podcast, read the book, and then afterwards come join us and we'll dive into the deep. So just come back to the podcast and re listen. All right.
So I won't get into too many plot details, but I do want to discuss a couple events and characters. And one of the characters that I like talking about, and we'll talk about multiple times, is
Mm.
Brent. Brent is actually based on a real person that one of the authors knew, and he is actually kind of the stereotypical um I don't want to say like IT person at a lot of companies, but he's the kind of person who everybody has his cell phone number. If they want something done, if they want their computer fixed or their system up, they call Brent, right?
Yeah.
They get him over and he updates their thing. And
Yeah.
he's kind of involved in everything.
In my mind, it's like the person that just knows how to do everything in the company and cares deeply about the company and cares about doing everything amazingly. And he is the linchpin of the company because then everyone starts to rely on him. And when everyone starts to rely on him, they all stop doing some of those parts because, well, Brent's going to do it. Why would
Yeah.
I do that?
Well, and Brent, one of the funny things, he's not an antagonist in the book. In fact, I would say the antagonist in the book, if there is an antagonist, I guess this is spoilery, but if there's an antagonist, it's like the process of creating something, right?
Yeah.
Or it's the process of doing work. That's the antagonist.
Yeah.
But Brent does kind of have a bit of a negative name sometimes in the Phoenix Project because there are a lot of times where you say, "Man, if Brent were here, the company would fix itself, right? Or they would realize the
Yeah.
problems they have,
Yeah.
right?" Brent does, to your point, he cares so much about the product. He cares so much about the company that he really can't take a vacation because they
Yeah.
need him to do all the little things. One thing I love about Brent's character, and that is one of the earlier moments, I think, with him, I forget, but they have an issue and all the servers are down or something like that, right? It's a big
Yeah.
issue. And Brent is there and he's in the war room and they're trying to figure out this issue. And then he says, okay, oh yeah, 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 yeah. And he changes something and then everything's back up.
Yep. Yep.
Nobody knows what he did.
Yeah.
And he does care about the company. He didn't want this thing to happen. But we've all had that experience where the system all goes down and we thought, oh, you know what? We did just update that one thing.
I think that's what happened in the story. He like updated the database and people didn't know.
Right. All the things that were based on the database now with the updated tables or whatever. I don't know all the details, but it was a very believable situation.
Very believable. So believable. I've been in those situations before. Yeah, I've been that guy who was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I think that's one thing that makes the Phoenix Project really easy to read. It's not high literature.
yeah,
It's not, the picture of Dorian Gray where every paragraph is well written. But it's fun in like a schlocky kind of way where
yeah,
all the characters.
yeah,
Everybody you read, you say, I've been there. I've worked at
yeah,
this company. I haven't really, but they're all very, very real to you.
yeah,
Some people I know empathize with some of the other characters on a more personal level.
yeah.
But I think you can go and read this book and never work at a company, and it would actually give you a good impression for how a lot of companies are out there, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to me at all of the companies I've worked at. There's not just one Brent in the company. Especially when you work at a startup. It's like 20 different Brents all running around saving the day, but not necessarily telling other people how to do it. So they're the only ones that know how to do it. And so when one of them is offline, of course that one thing breaks that no one else knows how to do. And what do? You either let it stay broken, you have the other Brents start trying to figure it out, or you call in Brent to fix the situation. I
Well,
think
with
that's hilarious.
with startups, everybody is important. When you
Yeah,
get a big company, you have redundancy. There are people who work on a team and you say, hey, we have 7 people. We really only need 4. But we have 7 because sometimes those people are sick. Sometimes we need them to work on other things.
yeah,
We build in redundancy, but it does kind of mean that not everybody is 100% important. When you get a startup, they don't have room to hire the redundancy,
yeah,
right? And I remember we had a demo one time with a startup where somebody was on their vacation 6 hours away and he
yeah,
came back because the demo
yeah,
wasn't working,
yeah.
right? He came back in the middle of his vacation, but it was because it wasn't worth it to teach another person his skills.
So my argument though is, can't you document it even a little bit? Like, sure, you're at a startup and everyone is the master of their own domain, but you can spend a little time documenting, can't you?
I agree. And I have a big policy where, especially in the beginning of a startup, where if I went on vacation or if I was out for a day, at that point I realized that the redundancy doesn't exist, but I need to do something to make it so that I can actually go on vacation,
Yeah,
so that I
yeah,
can actually leave the company, right?
yeah,
Temporarily.
yeah,
And so I would send out an email or Slack message or whatever with all the things that I think that might come up during the next week or during the
yeah,
next 3 days that I'm out.
yeah.
Hoping that people can kind of refer back to this before they go and refer back to the actual
I
person.
mean, that's not a bad idea. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate, and for the people who are listening to this who have worked with me, they're probably screaming at me right now, like, oh, yeah, you're the one to talk about making documentation. I think that's why this book really changed my life, because I'm constantly thinking I should not be a Brent in this situation. How do I make this clearer for other people to pick up when I'm not around? It sounds like you're very good at documenting.
I'm not very good at documenting, but I do care about the people on my team and what they know, and I
Yeah.
don't want them to suffer. So I care about that.
And I
And to
do
the
want them to suffer, so
right,
no, I'm just
just
joking.
so we got that clear. But yeah, it's funny. The Brent character, he's a very useful character to think about and to catch yourself when you do something that's Brent like. And again, Brent's not, to your point, Brent's not a bad character. He's not the antagonist. He's not somebody who's trying to destroy the company.
I think that's what's really interesting about Brent because there's so many different things about him. So one is the fact that he doesn't document anything and he's the bottleneck, but he's also, he does the deployment and he messes up the deployment.
Mhm.
And not only that, but he didn't notify anybody about the deployment. So then there was problems. Other people were troubleshooting, they didn't know. And he was the reason why they go on to the next part of the book, which is the theory of constraints. He drove that. He's the reason why they started looking at what is the constraining point? How do we involve some sort of process so that time isn't wasted? It's really interesting how, if you take him out of the book, do you still have the Phoenix Project?
No, 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 because the whole point of the Phoenix Project is we're going to take people in situations that we all know and use them to teach DevOps concepts. Now,
Yeah.
some of it is heavy handed. You
Yeah,
have a
for sure.
character who's like a mysterious character who just knows the ways of DevOps. I don't know how to fix my problem. Let's go to the sage in the woods who knows DevOps and he'll solve it for you.
John is the perfect character, the security officer running around. That's
Yeah.
not secure. That's not secure.
But there's a lot of people who know John. I've met him
I've known a lot
personally.
of Johns.
Yeah.
But like he's really interesting because in his mind, the only way everything's perfect is if you take that item, you lock it up, you chain it up, and then you throw it to the bottom of the ocean. That's the only way things are secure. And I think he's a really important character because security is important, but you need to balance security with making money. I think that's always the biggest struggle with security. How far into security is too secure? If you make it to the point where developers can't develop, customers can't access your product, like that is the perfect world in a security officer's world, but then you wouldn't have a company. And I think
Yeah.
that's why his character is so good, where they can't be as secure as John wants it to be because then they literally couldn't have a product.
Yeah, it's interesting. There were some people that hear you say that, like, well, you got to be profitable. It doesn't matter if you
Yeah.
have security if you're not profitable. I think there would be people who say you should have a company that can be secure and profitable. And if you
Yeah.
can't manage it, maybe you shouldn't have a company. A credit card company, right? They need to be profitable, and if they're not secure, that's
Yeah.
a problem. But also understanding the constraints of your own product. None of us are doing this out of maliciousness. John wasn't doing anything out of maliciousness. He cares about the security, the principles, the standards. There's a lot of security people that are just, we have an audit coming up.
Yeah.
We need to pass the audit.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
matter that you want to get your software update out, because if we don't pass this audit, then we're going to have a lot of other people barking down our throats. So
Well, and the other department that's in there that I've definitely had friction with before too is Sarah's department. She was playing the character of change management. In her eyes, we should never do a deployment. We need to stamp it, triple stamp it. We need to slow everything down because that's the only way that we'll never have failures. And I've had so much friction with change management departments, but it gets back to there needs to be a balance. The thing is, I kind of believe in a lot of what a change management team wants to do and believes in. I do
mhm.
think changes should be tracked in some way, shape, or form. I've worked at companies where they don't track any changes. It's complete chaos. It's complete chaos. To your point, I think the book does a really great job of extremizing, every character and their roles that they play. And I think that's why you can kind of picture them so easily with your company.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
are a bit like archetypical. Like, again, I wouldn't say that the Phoenix Project is the epitome of literature. It's not something you're not reading it and saying, like, have you seen The Night Agent on Netflix?
No.
Okay. There's a couple shows where like they're not highbrow. You don't watch it and feel like, "Oh, I'm learning something
Yeah, yeah.
fundamental about the human condition." You're like,
Yeah.
"I just want to see some guy shoot stuff."
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes like there's value in having something that is just digestible, right?
Yeah.
The Night Agent, for instance, was the most watched show 1 year on Netflix, right? And it's one of
Yeah.
those shows that's like, what? That's not Stranger Things. It's not.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But I do think that the fact that the Phoenix Project is so middlebrow,
Yeah.
it helps it relate to everybody. And that's what you
Yeah.
care about. You don't want something that's going to be a polarizing book.
Yeah, for sure. There's a book called Theory of Constraint. And that one's definitely a more heavy-handed, but it explains a lot of what they go into in that book lightly, like the car factory where there's a constraint and they're trying to process it. What's really interesting about theory of constraint is it was developed not from a software development point of view, but you could so easily apply a lot of those thinkings to it. That's definitely a good book. And then my other favorite, Seven Habits, for sure. But what about you? If you would choose a book that's kind of comparable to the Phoenix Project, what would you choose?
I wish I had something that was quite the same. I think the Phoenix Project is one of those books where we had an SRE team that we were developing at our company, and one of the senior people said, hey, everybody should read the Phoenix Project.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really good idea. I think there are some books where management will say, we're going to buy a copy of this for everybody, and they'll read it. And you're like, that, what did people
Yeah.
gain out of it? I'm sure the
Yeah.
manager got something out of it. But the Phoenix Project is just very easy to read. Anybody can go and probably learn something from it if they haven't read it. So it's hard to bring a book that's in like the same level. Most of the books that I would probably recommend are actually software books.
You got any good software books?
Code Complete was a book that I enjoyed reading. It's a pretty thick book. Have you read it?
No, is it good?
So Code Complete is one of those books that I think it just is full of these tiny good tidbits
Yeah.
that have just stayed with me.
Okay.
Now the first edition was written like, I don't know, in the 80s or 90s. It was written a
Okay, this
long
is an
time ago.
old book. Okay.
But the most recent edition, semi-recent, like
Yeah.
like 2016 or something.
So is this a story book or is this like a
No. It's more like, here's how to write good code.
Okay.
One of the things that I've taken with me, if you ever see me at your office, you'll see
Yeah.
I'll do this sometimes. There's a statement pretty early on where there'll be managers who come around and they'll see your computer and they'll say, is this person writing code right now? And the answer is like, as a developer, you shouldn't be writing code every second. But throw code on your screen and then do the actual important work of thinking about your code.
Yeah.
You need to spend more of your time thinking about the code. You need to spend more of your time reading code than
Yeah.
actually writing code.
Yeah. That's more true today than it ever was, right?
Yeah.
Because no one writes code. They just tell AI to write it and then they read it afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, that's
Yeah.
too big of a subject to touch at the end of our podcast.
But I did enjoy a lot of the anecdotes from that book. There's probably things that have come up since that I attribute to that book that are not from that book. Like the concept of like lines used instead of lines written. I don't think it's actually in Code Complete, but I really like the idea that you don't want your program to have more lines of code. You don't want to write extra code because every code that you write is something that somebody else has to read.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many times where I've written something and I'll literally comment in it and be like, I don't know what this code actually does. I wrote it in a haze and good luck trying to understand. I'm sure you've ran across it a couple of times, but
I mean, at least you put the comment in there.
yeah, at least I say I don't know what it does, so don't even try learning it. Well, because there's definitely times where there's just like this one thing that you want your programming language to do, and it just doesn't do it. And you're like, it's got to be able to know how to do this. There's got to be a way I can do this. And you keep adding lines of code and lines of code until it finally does it. And then you're like, you just slap it in a function and go, okay, never look at this again.
Yeah.
It does exactly what it needs to do. Don't understand it.
I was doing that actually the other day with Python because Python implements a min heap.
Yeah.
But max heap, it's like, oh yeah, you can implement a max heap. You just have to multiply everything by -1.
Yeah,
And then you use the min heap to make the max heap. I'm like, no. Like, I understand that you could do that And like it feels to me like that felt like a hacky solution. So I was like, do I go and implement my own max heap? Maybe yes, I do all the minusing one beforehand and handle all this stuff, but I'm like, why doesn't this come with Python? Anyways, books, on the topic of books, there are some people who find that
Yeah.
they can actually sit down and parse it on their own time. I do think that there's a lot of good books out there. Personally, for myself, I need something where I'm thinking about the book day to day. If it's a book about coding, I need to actually follow the exercises in the book or I'm not going to
Yeah.
gain anything from it. Going back to the Phoenix Project, a thing I loved about it was that I could read a chapter and go to work the next day. And I saw the problem that I didn't see before, right?
Yeah, for
You're
sure.
opening up this can of worms.
Yeah. So to review, if you haven't, read the Phoenix Project. It's awesome. 7 Habits if you're into self-help books, because that will change your life. Code Complete if you're into, improving your coding capabilities. That sounds like a pretty good
Oldie
reading
but a
list.
goodie. Oldie
Yeah.
but a goodie.
Yeah, it sounds like a good reading list. The only other one I would suggest is probably Good to Great. It's essentially just a book about how companies went from good to great. I think you'd be very into this book because it really talks about how something like Walgreens, how did Walgreens become the behemoth it is today? It's fascinating to hear some of the stories like that.
I know this is like the ending session where we're supposed to like sum up,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there was a Malcolm Gladwell book. Um, I want to say, gosh, I want to say it was like Blink, right?
Mm,
But I forget which one it was. But it said that, hey, when you take the top 20 companies in 2000
yeah,
and then you come to 2010, how many of them are actually in the top 20 anymore? A
yeah,
lot of them have fallen off,
yeah,
right? Some of them have gone bankrupt, right?
yeah, yeah,
But in the year 2000, everybody was asking, how are these companies successful? I think there's a lot to learn from companies, but there's also like it's kind of like you have a startup developer
yeah,
who for like 5 years of their career they're doing amazing work
yeah,
and then they never get that same high again throughout
yeah,
the rest of their life.
yeah, yeah,
Doesn't mean that 5 years wasn't amazing or something to think about. Uh it can be hard to like there are a lot of times where people will take successful stories and they'll say, we can make this happen 1,000
yeah,
times
yeah,
and like
yeah,
you can't. I don't know.
yeah,
There's a lot of like luck and really it's like the intersection of luck and skill, right? Like you want to have enough skill that when the luck happens you're
yeah.
ready there to meet it. So
Well, that is the end of our podcast. I am your co-host, Jesse Caffarelli.
and I'm Josh Warhurst and go read some books.
Have a good night, everybody.